So what I'm going to tell you about today is how cortical networks compute. So basically, I would like to give you a bit of an idea what types of research we are doing in the group. And then I will also very briefly introduce a recent project, and then in the end a bit, the different people in the lab and what they are doing. So it's a bit difficult because all the audience has very mixed background. So I hope there's something for everyone. Okay, so kind of the ultimate goal that we have in neuroscience is, of course, to understand the brain, which is super ambitious. So, and of course, it's not something that that we will achieve in the short run, but that's kind of the goal. So, but how do we do that? How do we start? And why is this so challenging, right? Yeah, first of all, the brain is kind of a very complex organ, and it's composed of, you can study it on very different levels. So it can start with kind of molecular level and proteins, and then study synapses, so how kind of single neurons transmit information, or you study it on the level of single nerve cells or neurons, or in terms of neural circuits. And then you can also go even higher up and say that, in order to understand the brain, what we need to understand is the brain and the body, because the brain is kind of not working without our body. So, so this is, and there's of course people working on all these levels. So the level that kind of we are working on is this level of neural circuits. And so what I will argue today is that this is an interesting kind of approach, because it allows us to really say something about the computations that are going on in the brain, and then connect it kind of to behavioral, so to behavior, so kind of experiments that you can do in animals or humans, and you get some behavioral reports, and you look what's going on inside the brain, and kind of by means of computational modeling, you connect these two. And this is, of course, also interesting, because then once you understand a bit better how a cortical circuit performs some operation, you can also study what happens if something is going wrong. So, for example, in some disease conditions, or when people are aging. And this is also something that we started to do now. Okay, so very, very brief introduction to what single neuron is doing. And I'm starting with this because the building blocks of our networks are single neurons. So this is a single pyramidal neuron, which has kind of this very beautiful structure. And basically, what you can do in experimental neuroscience, in classical experiments, is kind of stick an electrode very close to the cell, or even inside the cell, and then measure just the voltage. So measure the kind of the internal signal of the neuron, and this would be such a voltage trace. And then you see that there are these strong deflections, so these kind of peaks here, and those are called spikes. So this is when a neuron is communicating some information to other neurons. So often we are kind of not so much interested in this voltage trace per se, but just in the spiking activity. So you will see today many figures which show kind of these little dots. So these little dots mean when a neuron is active, basically. And so how can we understand like a single neuron? Well, as I said, there's entire research careers dedicated to studying just single neurons. So for our purpose, we really have kind of simplistic view and just consider that the neuron is integrating information coming. So these are kind of spikes coming from other neurons. And this neuron is integrating this information. And then when the voltage, the internal state of the neuron reaches some threshold, it emits a spike, and then this internal state is reset. So that's relatively simple. It can be described by one equation. And yeah, kind of surprisingly, you can even fit relatively well these real voltage traces and these real spike trains with simple models like that, kind of abstracting a lot from the biophysical detail. Okay, so this is kind of the building blocks. So what we do now is we build networks out of those neurons. And there's like one more thing, which is that now I was talking about this integration, but these inputs that are coming to the neuron, they can be kind of positive and negative. So this is Not that it's always integrating and just increasing the voltage, but it can also decrease. Okay, so we build networks out of these simple neurons, and then I will just show you like one very specific network, which is called the ring model. And what I did here is I built a network out of about in the order of thousands of neurons, so like 2,000 neurons, and I arranged them in a way that just for kind of visualization purposes, that neurons that are nearby are strongly connected, and neurons that are far away, they are less connected. Okay, and in the end, it forms like this ring. And so this here would be the connectivity profile, meaning that neurons that are nearby, they are very strongly positively connected, and neurons that are further away, they have this kind of negative interaction. Okay, so this seems a very cartoonish picture, and it is, of course, a very cartoonish picture, but it's one circuit that we have studied a lot, and which really permits us to make some interesting predictions about behavior and about neural activity. And also, I don't have time to go into detail, but actually, these kind of circuits really do exist in the brain. So at least in insects, it has been found really in this kind of structure, but now also people have kind of found some evidence for that also in mammals. Not in mammals, in fish. So these kind of circuits really do exist. Okay, so what can we do with this simple circuit? So first, I'm going to show you some simulations to get an idea. So what you see here is just uniform activity. So this is kind of the boring state of this network. And what I did here is these interactions between the neurons are not very strong. So there is some interactions, but they are not super strong. And then I run a simulation, and what I get is activity of these different neurons. So they are kind of like they are arranged in a ring. So I just indicate this by an angle, and this is kind of the angle that is on this axis. And then there is time on the other axis. So this is kind of what we call a raster plot. So we see the activity when each of the neurons is active at a given point in time. You see a little dot. That's it, basically. We can also go through this and take the average over kind of short periods of time, and this is then what I plot here. And you see, because there's nothing really very interesting going on, there's just some activity at each point in time, which is a bit fluctuating. So interestingly, this kind of state is also found in the brain. So this is kind of, this irregular activity is seen a lot. So also in that sense, this is already kind of a finding that you can reproduce this kind of activity. But it's not what we are most interested in. So what I do next is now I stimulate the circuit. So I give some input to the network, and let's see what the network does with it. So by input, I mean I now at a certain point in time, I kind of give some input signal to this kind of, to the neurons that prefer that have this close to 0 degree. And so if I do that, and I do this at time point 1, so what you see now, there's some more activity, right? Kind of makes sense. So I give some more input to the neurons and they become more active. So again, if you look at it in time, now we see that there's some period in time where there's a lot of activity, but then it goes away, right? So it's not sustained. It just fades away and everything goes back to normal. So now I do the same simulation, but I increase a bit the interactions between the neurons. So now they are a bit stronger connected. And you will see that the state of the network now is completely different. And what happens now is, again, it's exactly the same. So I stimulate just for a short period of time, but now the circuit kind of remembers the stimulation and stays active for the whole time. And you see that it's a bit noisy, so it's not perfect, but it's maintaining until the end, until 7 seconds. We still get some activity in the neurons. So this is this kind of state is called the bump state. And of course, what we can do now is by looking at the center of the bump, which would correspond to this red line, we can kind of read out information at each point in time. And just to show you another simulation that this is not just working for 0 degrees, so we can do the same thing, stimulating at 90 degrees, and then I would get the bump in a different place. So you can already kind of see that with such a simple circuit, we can do something like working memory. right? So we give it an input just for a short amount of time, and individual neurons are not capable of remembering something for a long time. So then, but by virtue of this network effect that we get here, we get this emergent bump, which kind of represents information for a long period of time. And so you notice where I'm going. So this is kind of can be related to working memory. So this is the type of memory that you use when you keep something in mind for a short period of time, like the PIN number that you have to remember and then write into your phone or something like that. And so, but how useful is this kind of network? So just like one finding is when we do now many simulations, so just repeat the simulations that I've shown you, but several times, and I always start now at 0. And you see that what happens with this readout, so this kind of the red line in the previous figure, you see that this kind of becomes more and more separated from 0. So it's kind of the variability increases over time, right? So, or in other words, this representation that we have in the network becomes less and less precise over time. And because this is really a mathematical model, we can understand exactly how this process operates and what is its time scale and what is its characteristics, and we can compare this to experimental data. So you can do experiments with human subjects or with animals that have to remember, for example, some item on a computer screen and then report where this item has been after some delay period. And the type of errors that they make and in these imprecisions that they make, they show exactly the same time characteristic as this very simple model. Okay, so this is one indication that with these really simple models, we can understand some fundamental computations in the brain. So yeah, I'm not going into more detail. I have kind of worked on that quite a lot, but this is kind of an idea how to connect relatively simple computational models to some behavioral report. So what I'm going to show you next is basically now a recent. So this is kind of old stuff. What I showed you now, very basic, and but very fundamental. And what I'm going to show you next is a very recent project that Jose Mari has done in the lab. So he was a postdoc that just left at the end of the year. And we just got the paper accepted finally yesterday. So we are super happy about that. And basically he uses this kind of circuit, but now studies not working memory, but decision making. And in a bit of special sense. So I'm just showing you what type of experiment we are interested in. So this would be the stimulus that is shown to participants in this case. And you have to look at the center of the screen, and then you see these oriented gratings. And what your task would be, and you're not supposed to do it now, but is to compute the average orientation that you see. So you have to do some continuous estimation of what you have seen. And typically, this is kind of going forever here because it's a GIF, but typically it would be like 5, 6, 7, 8 such different stimulus frames, and then you compute the average, and you report with the mouse or with the joystick what is the average orientation that you have seen. And surprisingly, there was no really computational model for this type of operations. So we thought, what would be the optimal solution to this problem? And the optimal solution is relatively simple. It's just you need to consider the stimulus as a vector, and then compute the vector average. So basically, you're computing what's called the circular mean. And vector average is just you draw all these little arrows, and then you make a resulting vector, and this would be the angle of this vector would be what you should report. So the details are not really so important here. The important thing is that we can understand what is the optimal solution to this given problem, and then our next step was how can we implement that in a neural network. And I cannot go through all the steps, but what turns out, we call this the perfect vector integration. But it turns out that actually this very model that I have introduced at the beginning is capable of doing this operation. But it's capable of doing that in a regime where this bump of activity forms very slowly. So while this bump is forming, it's kind of integrating incoming information in a way that is exactly as computing the circular mean. Okay, so what I show you another kind of video to illustrate that. So we have here now again the bump. So this would be the neurons that are active over time, and you will see that there will be some activity. So in the beginning, there's nothing interesting, but you will see a bump that is forming, and then we have this readout. So the center of the bump compared to the optimal readout. So blue would be the perfect kind of mathematical solution, and the red one is the readout from the network. And so yeah, let's start this. So you see in the end the bump is very small. You can even almost see it, and then slowly the bump is forming and it's moving around all the time, kind of reflecting the different stimuli that are presented. And you see that this kind of the perfect readout, the perfect solution and the readout from the network kind of match very closely. So again, you know, you may say that I'm cheating because this is just a single trial, so just a single experiment. But we can do that many times and then study, you know, how does the network perform on average. And if you do that, we can make this kind of estimation curves where we have the average orientation, so the true average, what the optimal model would give us, and the estimation that the network gives us, and it kind of lies on the diagonal. So basically, the network is doing really very well. It's doing very well, but only under certain conditions. So, and that's kind of actually also very interesting here, is because we are not only interested in finding an optimal solution, but we also want to compare what happens when we are away from this optimum. And in this project, it turned out that actually with these deviations from the optimal solution, we can explain experimental data. So the experimental data is from an experiment where subjects had to integrate 8 such orientations and then make the report. And you know, there's lots of variability here, but what you see in the data point, these data points here are for different groups of subjects. So some subjects, altogether it's like 61 participants, but they integrate the stimulus differently. So some of the subjects put more emphasis on kind of the early portions of the stimulus, and some other subjects put more emphasis on the late portions of the stimulus. So why is not entirely clear, but it's something that, you know, you can measure, and it's very just different people kind of perform the task differently, and some others are kind of more uniform, so they give kind of more equal weight to different portions of this stimulus stream. And now, what we can do with the model is we vary just one parameter in the model, which is the excitability. And with this, we can kind of perfectly explain this different behavior in the subjects. So this different level of excitability is kind of, this parameter which governs whether you get a very large bump or a smaller bump. So basically, it's can be related to some neural gain, for example. And so this is, again, you know, the model makes many more predictions than just this one. But again, this is to show you that we start with a computational model, but then we kind of also use experimental data to compare and to validate basically the model. So that's basically what I wanted to tell you about this project. So as a summary, we have a simple, so we have a relatively simple computational model, and there's just one parameter which kind of gives us a way of explaining human behavior. Okay, so in the last part of my talk, just 5 minutes, I will give you kind of an overview of what other projects we are working on. So the first one is about our new lab that we have in the basement. So the idea is now, up to now, basically this kind of data that I have shown you was from collaborators, but doing these experiments in humans is not very difficult, and we now have the means to do these experiments ourselves. So what I want to do, for example, is to study exactly this integration of stimuli, but now combined with working memory, so that you have to integrate stimuli over some time, then there's a break where you have to keep it in mind, and then you continue integrating before you have to report something. And this is kind of interesting because the model makes very specific predictions how this should work. And so just to give you an idea, of how these experiments are done. So basically, yeah, we have a computer screen, and then there are some stimuli that are shown to a subject, and then you can't even really see it. So we have here on the bottom of the screen is a thing which is called an eye tracker. So basically, this is infrared cameras which measure the position and the size of the pupil. So we control very tightly, or we can measure very tightly what people are really looking at the screen, and also the size of their pupil, which gives you a measure, yeah, actually of many cognitive things related to the size of the pupil. So it's not only if there's more or less light in the environment, which obviously changes the pupil size, but it's an interesting signal in its own. And then we can also measure EEG, so electroencephalography. So basically the signals, electrical signals of the brain, but measured on the surface. And with this, we can also get insights into kind of the buildup of a decision, or we can even decode from the neural activity what the person is currently remembering. Not very precisely, but it does work. Okay, so this is kind of one new research line in the lab. Then there is a new project student which actually did his bachelor thesis last year, Miguel Donderis, and he will now continue in the group. And he's basically studying yeah, a follow-up project of this project that I've just shown you, where we study the confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is basically that the choices that we make also depend on the history. So maybe you have come across confirmation bias in kind of a more psychological context, so that, for example, yeah, if you have a certain political opinion, then all the news that you will receive will kind of you will get a biased picture of what's going on in the world, right? Just based on your internal beliefs, and this is not really understood how this is going on in the brain, of course, because it's a very high level phenomenon. But it has been found recently that in terms of these very simple perceptual stimuli, the same things are going on. So when I show you some of those stimuli, it really depends what you have seen in the past and what have been your choices in the past, how you will perceive something, which is quite remarkable. And I think that our model can also give some insights into that. Okay, next one, Nicolas. So Nicolas is studying working memory. And this is something, yeah, which is a total gap in my presentation today, because I was talking about neural circuits on the one hand, and then behavior on the other hand, right? But if you build these neural circuits, we would also really like to see if the dynamics that we see in the circuit, is this something that we see in the brain, right? So, and this is exactly what Nicolas is working on. So basically, if you think in terms of the simple bump model that I've shown you, do we see this persistent activity in the brain during working memory? And so in order to study this, what Nicolas is working on is a data set that was recorded in monkeys from collaborators, and also now some EEG recorded also from collaborators. And basically is analyzing the neural activity and how it corresponds to computational models. So again, combining computational models and data analysis, but now on a level of the neural circuits. Okay, and Sarah is a postdoc in the lab, and she's working on the aging project. So this is again related to working memory, but now, and again with monkeys, but now in the setting of aging. So how does age affect the working memory fidelity, or the working memory precision? And yeah, generally you see a decline in working memory capacity with age, so in humans, but also in monkeys. And what these people, so what our collaborators in Boston did, is over the last basically 20 years, they characterized very well what's going on in terms of changes in neurons in aging monkeys. So basically they measure yeah, the morphology of single neurons, how the connectivity of the neurons changes, how their firing characteristics change. And over the years, they found kind of many correlations between changes on the neural level and changes in behavior and changes with age. But what is kind of missing is putting everything together in one model, which could then explain, based on the changes in neural activity and the neural structure, explaining what's going, why the behavior has changed. So that's kind of very ambitious to do that, but we have kind of several sub goals that we are working on. And yeah, this is Sarah's project. And we have two more. One is Sidlali, which is working on perceptual decision making and how basically how we can achieve flexibility. So that's kind of I think a very interesting thing, because in the computational model that I've showed you, basically we have some hardwired circuit and then it's, you know, it's doing something. But actually humans or monkeys also are very flexible in how they integrate, for example, information. So this is kind of what is shown here. So this is very similar pictures as or plots as I have shown you before. So how much emphasis does the monkey give to different portions of the stimulus? But in this case, the stimulus is manipulated such that there's actually more information in the beginning of the stimulus or more information in the end of the stimulus. So that means the monkeys can really, you know, switch their strategy depending on where they can collect more information. So now the interesting thing is for us is to understand how we can achieve this flexibility in a computational model. And again, it's a combination of computational modeling and an analysis of experimental data. And finally, yeah, the newest member of the lab is Lucia, and this is a collaboration also with Alexia Phil. Yeah, what she's gonna do in her PhD project is to look at now how the spatial characteristics of stimuli affect perceptual decision making. So this seems a bit kind of, yeah, why would that be important? So the idea is that in the end, all these kind of experiments that I've shown you use very simplified stimuli, and now the field is moving to kind of more, you know, more complex and more freely viewing conditions, more complex, more rich environments, richer stimuli. But if we want to study that, we need to really understand how the neural system is integrating those information across space and time. So this is where Lucia's project becomes interesting. And yeah, as I said, so one part is kind of here very strong focus on statistical analysis of the behavioral and neural data, and then network modeling. And yeah, that's it basically. I would also like to thank Alex a lot, who contributed to the project with Gemma that I showed you, and you know, of course all the group is kind of contributing and participating. And yeah, thank you.